Hey Harmonizers, welcome to this video with Mustang Aoife, who's going to do some pretty exciting things, like go for a ride with the first time being completely off a rope and Katie completely steering her. So we are in a totally different location, you may notice from a different arena, and that's because I was doing a workshop in Vermont. And I thought, you know what, let's bring Aoife. She's already got her paperwork from going into Pennsylvania for the Mustang show, so it didn't cost any extra. We were already going down, so may as well bring Aoife, and then she could make the most of the weekend, and we could continue training her for riding and getting her going under saddle, which was an important thing to do in terms of a timeline, because Katie is just with me for a couple months and then heading back to Poland. So it was important to try to figure out, okay, like let's try to make the most of the time while she's here, because while I am pregnant with my sister-in-law's baby, I'm not able to do the riding. So I thought it's super important to try to kind of give Katie that experience, but also give Aoife the experience of having some riding miles on her. So the first little bit you saw was groundwork of me just kind of getting Aoife ready, and then now it's Katie riding her for the first time without a rope attached. So you can tell that Aoife is still kind of following me a little bit as a guide because I'm holding the camera and she's kind of following. But Katie gets to start doing some of the steering, holding the reins, and doing more of the guiding piece. And so starting to steer Aoife kind of a little bit away from me. You can see Aoife's like, no, I gotta follow Lindsay. Lindsay knows where we're going. But Katie's starting to turn her more and ask her to go away from me, which is a little bit of a bigger thing for her to understand. So there was like the first kind of turn away from me. And she's having a good lick and chew and think about that. And Katie steering, the stops and not taking as much guidance from me on the ground, which is totally fine to do slow and steady and let Aoife learn that process, because she's mostly had that relationship with me doing all of that groundwork for so long. And now it's nice to start to transfer those skills to another person, and especially taking those cues from somebody on her back is a totally different thing. So Katie's kind of playing around with some of the basic buttons, asking her to go and stop and turn, those really basic things. And there, Katie's just really giving her her head, giving her the freedom to move a little bit if she needs to, or move her head. And then as we get going here, working on the steering, so trying to add that space between me and her. And it's a little bit hard to tell, like you don't have a great perspective of where I am, because sometimes I'm zooming in on the camera, sometimes I'm not. And overall, I'm kind of moving around a little bit in the arena, but she's steering around different objects. Like there you can see she steered around a tire pedestal, which is pretty cool, and around the bridges. So it gives Aoife a little bit of a visual of she needs to go around something. And it means that Katie gets to steer her through those different pieces. And of course, Aoife's done a lot of long lining, so she learned a lot of these cues already from the ground. So now it's just a matter of getting her to understand taking them from Katie, who's up on her back, and then pausing, Katie giving her the cookies. And so the fact that she's really slow to take a cookie, sometimes people would say like, oh, she's not really into the cookie. Maybe she doesn't like that treat, but really what's going on is Aoife's a very slow processing thinking horse. So she's just really thinking about what's going on. And oh my goodness, Katie's on my back. And it just takes a minute for her to kind of digest what just happened, and then she eats the cookie. So sometimes using food is also a great thing for showing us just how nervous they really are, or how much they're thinking and inside their head. And that was a great example of Aoife being really slow to take the cookie. Had nothing to do with her not being interested in the cookie, but more just to do with everything that's going on in her brain, which is totally fair and reasonable, because this is all new and different, and new environment, and new having somebody riding her and giving direction up top, new being off of the rope and all of those little pieces. And then here what's new is adding in trot with Katie on her. And so what we're doing is we try to just introduce one little piece at a time. And this is now a different ride, a different day, because we were there for a few days. And so this is now a different day, not doing everything all in one session, and working on adding in trotting pieces. And Katie's basically sitting like a sack of potatoes, not doing a whole lot. Very similar to how when she had the giant Minnie Mouse on her back, Minnie Mouse sat like a sack of potatoes and just went along for the ride, no pulling or kicking or things like that. And Katie is essentially doing the same thing because we're trying not to overwhelm Aoife. We're just doing one little piece at a time. So getting used to what it feels like having a rider on their back. Sometimes these things, even though we do a lot of preparation, like putting the giant stuffy on her, doing all the long lining, walk, trot, and canter with the long lining, all of those little pieces, they can still get overwhelmed. They can still have moments where they get triggered. And it's just like with humans. Like if you think about it, whenever we're learning something new, sometimes we can get overwhelmed or stressed, and there can be moments where we might have an explosion or a point where we kind of boil over the top, so to speak. And that can be different for each person. That could be where we snap, we yell, we get angry, we storm off, or we get, inside ourselves and we shut down. There's lots of different things, and horses are very similar. They can react in different ways. They could have a moment where they crow hop, they buck, they scoot forward, they take off a little bit because they get scared and they get out of their thinking frame of mind. And we don't always know what's going to provoke them over the top. So it's a careful process of trying not to have that happen, but definitely it's something that can happen. So we just have to be really careful about all those little pieces and doing one little section at a time. So now that I did the trot work, then it was a matter of Katie going back and adding in the buttons and the cues. So here's a little look at asking Aoife to do some sideways and moving the shoulders, all those different little pieces. And so essentially Katie is asking from the saddle and giving the riding cues, and then I'm on the ground to give clarity and support, because we get confused when we're learning, whether it's a horse or it's a human. We can get confused, and when we can offer some clarity, if you know one way to do a thing, but we're trying to teach another way to do the same thing, then sometimes it helps if we put those cues together of the new way of asking plus the familiar way of asking. So it can be like, oh, like that's what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to move your shoulders there. Here's a cookie, and Katie's reaching down and giving her a cookie. But when Aoife gets confused, she already's learned all these cues from the ground, so I can support that and cue that, and it helps her have that information so she can get it right. So there you can see it's same thing where Katie asked for her to move the shoulders, and then I offered that clarity for her of, like just move your shoulder a step, which is why it's helpful to teach a horse many ways to do the same thing. So when you need to clarify for them what it is they're supposed to do, you have options and ways that you can help. When people have the approach to horses of like, I only back up a horse like this, or I only stand like this, that's where it gets very challenging, because then when you're in situations where you're at a different distance or wherever it is, it can be harder to help provide that information to your horse. You can be very limited. So I really like to teach my horses many ways to do the same thing, whether it's a cue because I'm touching them, it's a cue because I'm not touching them, I'm at a distance. It's a cue where I'm standing in front of them. It's a cue where I'm standing behind them. All of these things help to give that horse more information, more ability to understand what I'm asking, and then it gives me more options to help them as well. So after doing a whole bunch of steering around work, then I bring Katie back to do a little bit more trot work. And there's a bunch that's cut out of this video because I didn't want to make it a super long 30-minute plus video, but also a lot of it's very repetitive, because a big part of learning something new that involves like your balance and things like that just takes a lot of repetition. Same way that if you were learning to swim or skate or ride a bike, you can get a fair bit of instruction, but at the end of the day, it comes down to a fair bit of practice and just kind of getting used to that feeling and used to what those things mean, so that way it can become a bit more like second nature for you, and understanding all of those pieces. So here, finishing with some more trot work. She had a really good trot part in the beginning, and then finishing with some nice trot work. And you'll see we get to finish on a small little piece where I unclip the rope and Katie actually does a little bit of a trot all on her own. And I try to keep it in small little pieces because I'd rather have a super short amount of trot and it goes really, really well and Aoife's okay than asking for too much and having an explosion. Those are the moments that we try to avoid. Aoife's had a couple moments here and there where that's happened. I think I showed one in the video clip, I think with the Minnie Mouse, where she did go off bronching a little bit with the Minnie Mouse. Not horribly, but got overwhelmed. But we try to keep those to a bare minimum if we can, is a good thing. So that was a tiny little bit of a independent trot right there. She did really, really well. And you can see Katie's giving her lots of praise and is just going to get off there and end on a great note. And so that's a little look at Aoife coming to Vermont so she could continue her riding training. Let me know what you think.
Remember to subscribe and check out harmonyhorsemanship.com for even more learning.